Hello everyone, I hope you all are well. So, once again, I welcome you to the Satwa channel, an official online platform of the Satwa project. Myself, Samiksha.
Myself, Samiksha Mishra, and we both are from the Satwa Youth, bringing Dharma to you and preaching Dharma with you. Satwa Youth is a Buddhist youth program initiated by the Satwa Project. So, before begin with our discussion and introduction session, let me thanks to our streamer sponsor, our media partners, and Durian Nation and Durian FM for their constant and kind support. And also, one more person who manages all the technicalities in the background, our broadcast director, Brother Chong. Brother Chong, would you like to say something, please?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our broadcast this evening, wherever you are. And please do like and share so that more people can benefit from this. And for those watching on YouTube, you may also like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Chong.
So, today we are going to have a new topic in our Noble Tara series, which we started, I think, next month. So, the topic for today's discussion is Women, Buddhism and Psychology. So, before we begin with the topic, with the discussions, so as we do usually, let us introduce you to our moderator and today's contributors. So our today's moderator is Sister Smita Lahiri. So Samiksha would like to introduce
Yeah,
her to
sure.
our audience. Yeah.
Yes, please. Okay. So our moderator of tonight's discussion is Mr. Smita Lahiri. Having spent over 20 years in the technology industry, Smita decided to give it up and dedicate more time to her Dharma journey. After finding some precious teachers and attending several retreats, she decided to undertake structured study of Dharma. She recently graduated with a diploma in Buddhist philosophy from Nalanda tradition from Tibet House, Delhi. She is currently on the board of Tashi Gatsal Link Buddhist Center in Maine and works closely with Venerable Dasel. During her corporate tenure, she was on the advisory board for the Grace Hopper Conference for Women in Technology and worked passionately for the cause. She was a counselor for her cancer patients and their caregivers, something that helped her immensely in her Dharma practice. Asmita is based in Bangalore, India. Be happy to have you, Sister Smita Lahiri, as our moderator.
Thank you, Samiksha and Samiksha. Thank you for having me.
So our first contributor is Venerable Tenzin Dasel. Venerable Tenzin Dasel, she's a teacher and leader who has been practicing Buddhism and meditation for over 2 decades. She is the founder of Main Mindfulness Project and serves as a Buddhist spiritual advisor at Bates College and the spiritual program coordinator at Tashi Gatsen Link Buddhist Center. She holds many honors and distinctions for her work with women, children, and youth throughout the US, India, and the world. We are very pleased to have you, Venerable, for our today's discussion. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much to everybody there at Sattva for providing this opportunity and platform, to Smirta for moderating, and to all of the other panelists. Thank you so much. I look forward to a really fruitful and wonderful exploration of this topic.
Our second contributor is Patricia Snider. She is a certified clinical counselor with the prestigious CCC designation from the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association and registered clinical counselor with British Columbia Association of Clinical Counselors. She has been a somatic and wellness practitioner for over 30 years. She holds a number of academic qualifications, including MA Counseling, uh, MD in Pastoral Counseling, Advocate Diploma Holistic Counseling, and Graduated Diploma Buddhist Psychotherapy, MA Buddhist Studies. She specializes in mindfulness therapy, certified in MICBT and MBSR, and works with individuals and groups. Happy to have you, Patricia Snider.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all these other wonderful women.
So, Our next contributor is Sister Tripti Lochan. She is the co-CEO of Asia, co-CEO Asia VMLY and R. Tripti runs the Asia region for VMLY and R, a global brand and customer experience agency with over 12,800 employees and more than $2 billion in annual revenue. Tripti manages diverse market across Asia and is responsible for the strategy and growth of VMLY and R in Asia. Regularly sought for opinion on all matters marketing, Tripti judges award shows like the FEs and AMES, speaks at diverse conferences including keynotes at AdTech and Foresters, and writes opinion pieces in Campaign Asia, Business Insider, and CMO.com. Tripti is a Buddhist, and her Dharma journey started with a Vipassana retreat that sparked her thirst to learn more about Buddhism in 29. Uh, she has completed the Nalanda Diploma in Buddhist Psychology from Tibet House taught by Geshe Dorji Damdullah, and is in the second year studying Doric of a 3-year logic and debate course taught by Atisha Mathur at ILTK, Italy. She knows that these are the very first steps of her journey.
Thank you
Hello,
so
Tripti.
much.
We
Hello,
are very
hello.
pleased to have you on our discussion panel today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for the next hour and a half.
Yeah, we do. So now we hand over the program to Sister Smita. So, Sister Smita, please take over.
Thank you, Samiksha and Samiksha. Thanks a lot for those introductions and for your kind words. So, I welcome all our viewers today and our esteemed panelists for another episode of the Noble Tara series. I think through this series, we intend to have conversations on relevant topics about Buddhism and women, but not restricting it to Buddhism and kind of keeping it open, not restricting it to women per se, and have more open dialogues about men and women. So we won't draw the lines too strictly, but we'll welcome thoughts on um, men as well. So for those of you who are new to this Noble Tara series by Sattva, so far we've had conversations on empowering Buddhism women here and now. The topics we choose as part of this series are primarily aimed at helping all of us listening in introspecting, empowering, and helping us in our dharma journey. I think that is the ultimate aim, right? I mean, those who are coming in to listen in is just about for them to learn and grow and go forward in their journey. So having said that, we set the theme for today's conversation as women, psychology, and Buddhism. It is a common belief and perception that men and women differ in their psychologies or their emotions, their behaviors. And it is our attempt via this session to look at these nuances in the psychology of women, how that plays a role in how women approach the Buddhist practice. And we'll draw on personal experiences from our esteemed panelists. We have a diverse panel. And of course, Patricia will weigh in with her expert opinion with a clinical psychologist's point of view as well. I would also like to call out that, we would like our audience to know that we do not want to make any attempt here to stereotype women or men. We are really inclined to have a genuinely open and holistic conversation
Yeah.
just in order to enable us to explore ourselves within, have our internal dialogues, and really help us understand ourselves and our practice better. So we'll begin today's conversation with some opening comments from our panelists. We often notice that in a lot of dharma centers, and that's been, I think, a lot of our experience. Again, I don't want to generalize, but then, anecdotal evidence. We see a lot of women in dharma centers and retreats around the world. So I'll invite our panelists today to weigh in on their perspective about the same and then share some of their personal experience of what they think of why women are drawn more to Buddhism across the West and the East, right? We've seen across the spectrum. So we'll start with you, Tripti.
Wonderful. Thank you. Um, I feel, and of course, this is a very personal opinion, not backed by statistics of any kind, but I can relate to myself first. As a woman, I have pockets of time available to me amongst the myriad of other things that I'm doing, full-time work, family, and so on. And I needed something that was not dictatorial or very boxed in the way I could practice and learn on my journey. I needed something which said, believe in what you think is authentic, find different ways of reaching the path that you believe in. And for a layperson, not for you, Venerable, or not to speak on behalf of anybody else, you can make the path whatever is possible for you. My teachers have always said something is better than nothing, so, and for women, I believe just doing that little one step instead of a ritualistic, confined lineage of first this, then this, and if you don't do this, you have to do that, and so on. The openness of it and the logic of it lends itself very well to time poor people. And I believe, and again, happy to be proven wrong, women are more time poor because of the multitude of roles that they play seriously in their lives than men are. So my perspective was just that it allowed me the ability to take more someday and less someday, and dive in deeper when I could, instead of being very prescriptive in what I had to do.
Thank you so much for that, for your opening comments. I think it was a very valuable observation that Buddhism lends itself to a sort of open and do as much as you can kind of practice versus a very ritualistic, methodical, and imposing structure to it. So, Venerable, what are your thoughts on why do you see women getting drawn to Buddhism more naturally?
Yes, well, hello everybody, wherever you are in the world. Nice to be here with everyone today. And I think right now, historically, we're in an era that's quite profound. First of all, because it's a time when females have the highest access to education ever before than worldwide. To not just secondary education, but studies have shown even when girls get educated to 8th grade, they make profoundly different choices in their lives in terms of knowing that they're empowered to plan their lives. And I think in my experience now traveling around the world on 5 continents and sharing Buddha Dharma, just sharing experiences in the airport with people, chatting with them, is that there's a sense of opportunity for female embodied beings, even for gender diverse, whatever the young generations getting out of these gender role ideas. They're even expounding on those concepts because of education, because of this deep looking at who are we essentially. And I think women naturally, as Tripti very, very profoundly noted, are very much better at kind of multitasking, maybe also intuitively knowing through their compassion, their sense of concern for the way the planet's going right now, that, geez, women need to show up and take part, and not just as mothers, not just within a little small locus of their family or their immediate community, but they really want to engage with their contributions on a much more profound level as they're able to. And so this is a wonderful time to be a female, a female embodied gendered person as such, as wanting to work with that kind of a biological intuitive sense that, when we talk about feminine female, there's a gendered idea and then there's a biological female. When we talk about psychology, there's mind in Buddhism, which is not the same as brain and biologically informed cultural ways of being in that body. So it's quite profound. But I think for the females that are coming to the Dharma now, they're recognizing through their education, through their intuitive knowing, through their capacity to engage with very deep issues that call for a wisdom and compassion to show up, to start to really say, look, enough is enough. We've got to transform ourselves. We've got to bring that transformation through dialogue. We're very good at that. Even when women disagree, like to hang in there and try to get to the crux of it, not burning bridges. And they're looking now at the Dharma, which the Buddha, he founded the Bhikkhuni Sangha. He founded the Fourfold Sangha. He included the lay women equal to laymen. He included bhikkhunis equal to the bhikkhus. This is a very modern, liberating, profound structure that the Buddha set up. You know, he was quite feminist in that way. He recognized that any mind, any embodied mind, even to a little insect, a fly or a bee, can become an enlightened being. How much more so than for a human, precious human rebirth, interest in the Dharma. And he didn't just say to be born male. That all came later. You know, so this is a very profound, liberating message that we ourselves walk the path, we ourselves study, take the wisdom and compassion, and it's really actually liberating and empowering any gendered beings, but especially women who have been denied the sacred presence in the temples, the sacred presence as sharing the spiritual wisdom, to come forward, like Jetsima Tenzin Pamela, become a worldwide teacher and share and encourage other women to, yes, you're most of the people here are 90% female. Wonderful. Carry the Dharma forward back into your lay life, but believe in your capacity to walk the path to its highest fruition. So I just rejoice. I think we've all been born as everything Buddha said. We've all been male and female, but this is a great time to be a woman.
So we'd like to hear from you, Patricia, what what drew you to Buddhism, and what are your observations?
So what drew me to Buddhism was to end my suffering. And I realized that, that I had come from a dysfunctional background, and that there had been much healing. But that I needed something else. And Buddha's words spoke straight to my heart. So it was quite emotional for me, my choice to take refuge in Buddhism. That someone had a formula, if you will, a path to normalize suffering, and then to offer a way to end suffering. Yeah, that was it for me. And it has actually changed my life. And one of the things that, that I know as a therapist is that suffering is not gender specific. That we come here with the same khandhas or skandhas. There is so much about us that is all the same.
Right.
And that they actually, help us to form our personalities. We realize that. But that suffering is commonplace for all of us. And I have devoted most of my adult life to helping others relieve their suffering. And what I noticed for myself as a therapist is that Buddhism really informed the way I practice, not only personally, but as a psychotherapist. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for those opening comments, Patricia. And while you were talking about, it was really an emotional decision for you. I think I saw all of us nod, right? I mean, all the women on this panel are nodding and saying, yes, it was an emotional decision. I guess all of us could relate to it immediately. So having studied Buddhism and being a clinical psychologist, so what do you say is the truth behind women being more emotional beings, and how do you think this impacts their practice of Buddha Dharma? Does it act as a barrier, or does it make the practice harder for them?
Yeah, well, you know what? Research has absolutely surprised me because we know that, I think it was in 1997, Brody wrote a book and about how women actually display more emotion than men. And then it was like, well, the train just ran away with that. And so we have media, we have books, we have magazines, we have everybody is on this this bandwagon, if you will, to say that women have more emotion than men do. But truthfully, studies now indicate that that is not true, and that actually through magnetic resonance, you know, the imaging, the MRIs, they show that that often women are not more emotional than men, but might be more emotionally responsive, if that makes sense. And that they assert that this is a myth, that it is called a master stereotype. Social psychologists call this a master stereotype, which I find really fascinating. And the reason that that it is such a master stereotype is because a lot of cultures, people of many cultures, have gotten behind this to believe this to be true. But investigating the activity of amygdala, you know, our emotional center, among men and women, they see there's no greater activity, yeah, in females than there is in men. What else did I find? This is a beautiful thing, I think. And, you know, Venerable can maybe add to this, that men may, and because it was something that she referred to earlier, I thought, that's right, that men may quantitatively reduce the amount of negative affect that they experience, whereas women may qualitatively transform their negative affect into positive affect. And I think Venerable was talking about that transformation, that women are capable of this true transformation. So how does that impact us in terms of, in the context of our Buddhist practice? Well, we're just on for the job, aren't we? You know, we came here wired. We have dense connections, nerves. Our nerve centers are denser than men. So we're actually wired for this, to understand suffering in a profound way and to want to change it, to want to transform. And on. We could just go on and on, you know.
Can I follow up on that, Patricia?
How women are strong, yeah.
That's wonderful. I have a couple of inspired thoughts listening to Patricia. Is it okay to follow up, Smita, or do you have some?
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, exactly that, Patricia. I think, first of all, the Buddha, when I came, I think everyone I've met comes to Buddhism because the Buddha didn't really normalize suffering, but he recognized it as a pervasive experience in life. And what he did was not normalize it, actually. He said it's not normal. Pain is actually part of life experience, not just for human beings, but for all living creatures. Even little insects, a mosquito doesn't want you to take its life. It's just living nicely according to the way it's programmed as that kind of a life form to live. But actually no living form wants the suffering, not animals, not fish, not birds, not human beings. So he looked at suffering and said, well, this is our first problem. There is suffering there. And then he diagnosed it and said, you know, so that's the first noble truth. There is suffering, but no one wants it. So why does it come? Why does it arise in experience and mind stream? Then he looked for the second noble truth and said, actually, because we're misperceiving the reality, the way we perceive things, the way we relate with them, the way we take them in. In this case, this is also why women overly emotionally suffer is because they feel everything so deeply based on their experiences, based exactly on that biology and deeper intuitive, compassionate wiring that really creates much more emotional pain. Now, that emotional pain can be healthy to a sense where we do love, we do accept that, there's a lot of confusion because we're not seeing the true reality. But once we get clear with that, we don't suffer from it anymore. And so the Buddha said, actually, there's a third noble truth, that suffering is changeable. It's not endemic to who we are. It's removable. And then how do we do that? Well, then he gave the fourth noble truth of the Eightfold Path. So he laid out this whole program, as you said, this whole dharma, beautiful dharma of being able to use investigation. So there's faith, but it's not a blind faith. It's validating to our own experience. It's faith based on our own reason, and it's a faith based on our own intuition, knowing that actually, suffering isn't natural. I mean, pain is there. We can accept pain on a physical level. We can accept pain on a mental and emotional level, but it doesn't have to transform into intense suffering, depression. Those things come, he said, because we're still misperceiving the real nature of how things exist. Deeply interdependent, but we're also now these days, I think, confusing a little bit of when we talk about mind and when we talk about brain. When we talk about neurology and biology, and we talk even about physics and these concepts of trying to understand who we are, to the Buddha's deep look at what is mind. Mind as a sixth sense, pure, radiant, formless, non-physical, beginningless, endless. No one's ever been able to find mind, and so this is what, we're saying that Noble Aryadhara series, and Dara is famously known to say to the monks when they said, oh, your job is really good, but get a male body the next life, you can become light. She says, here there is no male and there is no female. So she's pointing out directly that and able to investigate, to perceive, and then just to be aware, to be alert without any conceptuality. That's a very high state of mind. This is what monastics train for in long, deep retreats, because to get rid of all those concepts, for lay people, it would be very difficult to do it in your day-to-day life because you need to function in the world as it is that you're in it. But as Tripti said, there's no reason not to start to walk the path for deeper understanding, for training, mind training. And so the Buddha laid all this out, and he founded the Fourfold Sangha because when his attendant, when Shariputra came to him and said, look, your stepmother and all the 500 ladies are out there. They've walked barefoot from the palace. They've taken off all their clothes. They're already in lesser clothes. Why will you not ordain them? Can they not attain? The Buddha said, of course they can attain. But he had other reasons socially, their role in the society. I think he could see how critical the woman's role is as the first nurturer, as the caretaker, as the one who's birthing the world, to just encourage women to stop doing that all at once. He probably saw we've got to do this kind of slowly. But yes, now is the time that we can start to establish the Fourfold Sangha. So all those roles are equally recognized as important. And that right there, just by doing that, he got rid of the gender bias. Even when he attained his first enlightenment in the scriptures, it says, Mara said, all right, you've made it. I give up. I'm not keeping you in samsara. You've won. Now you can go. And the Buddha said, no, I won't go into my final parinirvana until I establish the Fourfold Sangha. So that was critical for him because he knew it would be the Dharma that would be the ultimate liberating message. We would have all loved to have seen the Buddha, like we love to be with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we love to be with our beautiful, precious teachers and guides. But the real gem that's left for us to follow is the Dharma. And anyone who's a serious practitioner, and as I mentioned, education, because still so many women around the world, and even a fair number of men, are not literate. They're not able to, they don't have time to have the education and study. But for those of us who do, it's amazingly profound opportunity to make the best advantage of this precious human rebirth.
Thank you so much, Venerable, for shedding light on the background of how the Fourfold Sangha was established. But coming back to emotions, I would like to ask Tripti now and get her personal experience on how does she perceive her emotions being a strength or a weakness, or helping her on the path of the dharma? How do you see it?
Well, thanks, Smita. That's such a great question. So when and I'm just going to keep relating back to my life because it's the most ordinary of the paths that's been followed here. Um, when I started working, my first boss told me that I was high maintenance in a review. So he didn't review the work I had done for a year, but he reviewed my reaction in workplaces by saying I was high maintenance because I would get emotional about my work. And my first response was tears. Uh, by the way, I was not sad, or it was just part of the expression of who I was. And he took that as something that was unbecoming of the workplace. Uh, that perhaps was one of my first learnings as a manager, because I would go into meetings and tell the people that worked with me, please cry if you need to cry. I mean, it's perfectly okay to cry because it's just a manifestation of how involved you are in what you are doing, right? And expressing yourself. I feel as women, and I relate this back, um, we have the biggest strength in being able to have gotten official permission to be as emotional as we want to be in anything we want to do, you know? And men don't. Poor things, them. I mean, I think they would benefit so much from being able to see how they're feeling. So that emotional connect with yourself, I feel we have more permission officially to do it, and we are encouraged. I think it's a huge strength for us as women to be able to say and have the awareness of saying, this is how I'm feeling right now. And I feel men are more boxed into things in which they are forced to behave in a way where the face that they put on may or may not be the face that they are feeling at the time. So I think if we talked about awareness and spirituality, because the first fundamental that you learn is being present, being here right now. Um, that was the first present I learned in Vipassana, which, as you know, and I followed Sri Goenka ji, the 10-day Vipassana, and I found it profoundly valuable for me because the one thing that they focused on was shamatha, to begin with. And it was so powerful because you were in the moment. And if I do nothing else for the rest of my life, if I can learn just to be in the moment, I feel I would have walked one step further in my path. And when I relate that back to work, I think being in the moment is so important as a woman, because when you go to work, you still have all the things that are happening at home going on. My mother-in-law needs breakfast. My daughter, is having an emotional discussion that she wants to take with me, and so on. But if I can be just here on this call, on this panel with you, just sharing my experience for the moment, at the moment, I feel that awareness of the now is so profound. And I think that's the first step. So that's how my journey started. And I would keep relating what I learned on my journey back to my workspace as it got more and more tense, as it does for all of us in whatever we are doing, whether we are a Genla like Venerable teaching people, or like Patricia trying to alleviate somebody's suffering, or for Smita, who's also walking the path with me in Geshe-la's training as well. I think if we can learn small things as women, which are tools, to take back into the other life. I'm sorry to say it like that. It's not really in another life, it's the same life, but to compartmentalize a little bit of me time for ourselves and take that back and relate that. I think that's such a powerful thing to have in our arsenal.
Thank you so much, Tripti. I think very valuable insights there from your own personal experience. I would like to come back briefly to Venerable here. Uh, you know, women in robes, we often are a mystery to us, right? I mean, what do they feel? Do they feel emotions, or, how are they handling their emotions on their journey? If you could shed some light on that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
does it act as a barrier for you sometimes?
Well, part of the training is we really look at emotions and to see which ones are really helpful and which ones really aren't. And we look at emotions often, of course, coming into robes, we're human beings. So, of course, we have emotions. And as we walk the Dharmic path, what we start to really learn and train in is which emotions are really skillful and helpful, and which ones are just very reactive and old habits that are just really reactivity and emotionally draining and really not productive. And so we really look at the main emotion, of course, the emotions are loving kindness and compassion. And as I said, yes, we often take our own suffering. Of course, that's why we got interest in Buddha Dharma. Is like, yes, I recognize that I've had tragedy. I've had big conflict in my life. I've lost loved ones. I've been in places in the world where there's been war. I've witnessed human and animal suffering, environmental degradation. So you're starting with your own response to that, wanting to do something. And yes, sometimes you're profoundly, I mean, when a member in my own family was tragically, her life was taken very suddenly when I was 21, my grandmother, and I literally collapsed to my knees in tears at the cemetery, and it was really impossible to stand. There was so much grief. I mean, that kind of suffering as a 21-year-old who had no framework to try to put into what had happened automatically meant I put it into the framework I had, which was in the 80s, was a family member, attachment to her, aversion to the other family member who took her life, her son who had a nervous breakdown, young feminist, men are aggressors. It was very bad, unskillful frameworking, actually, because it just created much more duality. And it didn't bring me to a place of light. It brought me to what Roshi Joan Halifax at the time wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And I was like, well, this isn't good. My natural joy now is not only gone, but I'm not coming any closer to who my grandmother would have wanted me to be. She was really my first spiritual teacher. And it was her own voice, the kind of a visitation that came that said, look, you can do better. You have to find your own path. You have to really dig deep now and really follow what I taught you, which is believe in the power of love as the highest power, and use your good heart and your good mind to find that way. And then slowly, many things in my own life started to open up, not getting much easier all the time, but through challenge, remembering that was the ground I was coming from, and then using what I would eventually hear from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and my teacher Khenzo Rinpoche Sitan talk about was the two wings of the bird, which are wisdom and compassion. So as you study Buddhism, the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom of how things arise, dependent arising is another way to say wisdom. In other words, there are causes and effects, and many of them we can look at our life and we can say, so in my case, looking with the wisdom of like, okay, I understand now, this uncle is not an enemy. He had a psychiatric break with reality. No one would ever want to take their mother's life. And my grandmother was very much spiritually oriented in her Christianity, trying to help her son. The way it's talked about in the Bodhisattva ideal, if a child is really suffering, the one person who will always jump into that suffering hell will be the parent, the mother or the father who loves them the most, trying to help them. And I started to see the wisdom of like, oh, this is another way to frame and look at this challenge. And then it started to infuse, like Tripti said, my whole life. It didn't matter whether I was going to work, whether I was on the basketball court, whether I was traveling, this wisdom with the compassion, looking deeply, saying no creature wants to suffer, but this world is very confused. There's a lot of suffering because beings don't know why they suffer. In other words, one of my teachers said, short of becoming a Buddha, everyone's suffering from some mental illness because the nature of the reactivity of emotions, of biology, of challenge is so overwhelming that people just react and respond, always trying to find some kind of happiness until it leads then to maybe psychosis, maybe addictions, maybe all kinds of distractions, which then create more emotional pain. So in my case, I was able to look and using my own analytical meditative mind with wisdom to study, to follow the path, bringing in the deep compassion for my own experience that use those emotions. And then eventually through the whole practice, especially in Geluk tradition, I'm very non-sectarian. I follow all my teachers are Geluk, Kagyu, Nyingma, Sakya, but we all use wisdom and compassion, which is knowing the wisdom of emptiness. And then your compassion gets really much more impersonal. It goes out so far and wide. Then your tears are not, they're knowing from your own experience, but they're coming out for everything that suffers. So instead of feeling aversion and judgment and anger towards that uncle, I could have understanding and feel compassion. Of course, no one would want to do that in their right mind, And so as a very young person taking all this on, that view was able to start to help me be much more effective on a world scale, like working with HIV/AIDS, working with other people suffering much more profoundly and not losing myself to that, not burning out. And in fact, actually, you become much more joyful, like His Holiness. Think of all the suffering His Holiness has had to witness himself go through, his own life being under attack, losing his whole monastery system that had been set up over 1,000 years, millions of people murdered and dying, and he's leading everyone out. And then he becomes able to lead this whole world through wisdom and compassion. So this is a kind of using our own experience, but the transformative power of the Dharma with wisdom and compassion, like wings of the bird, that then we can fly. Then we have fearlessness. Then we have profound capacity to lead and to bring that wisdom and compassion everywhere, because it's based, as I said, in faith, but in reason, with emotion, but beneficial emotions. So in a sense, like there's one book that the FPMT, the Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Tradition, puts out. Lama Yeshe, who is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's guru, it's called Becoming Your Own Therapist, which I think is great, because it's using the Dharma saying, look, these emotions, you'll always only react based on your emotional habits of unskillful, beginningless time kind of lifetimes of developing those emotional habits that will only end in duality. And then that sadness will lead to depression and heaviness and paralysis. You won't feel like you have any kind of joy left. But if you frame it in the Dharma, you'll see, there's a middle way with emotions. Like you don't have to purge yourself at all of emotions, but with the view that understands dependent arising, how these things come into being, that wisdom helps you understand them with compassion much deeper. That's like, okay, I'm going on the Bodhisattva trail because just like me, no one wants suffering. And unlike me, most don't have any way to stop their suffering. And then you feel really joyful, like, yeah, that's my job description. That's the work, as Patricia aptly said, like, that's it, however we're meeting it. And then you really become like His Holiness, like a true bodhisattva, true Jetsu Tenzin Pamola, and my teacher Kensei Rinpoche, like profoundly benefiting far and wide, far beyond your own culture, far beyond your own gender, your own nationality. All those things fade away. You're just there for others. You just can't stand even the idea that others are suffering when there's a possibility to come out. Wonderful. How wonderful that is. Emaho.
Thank you so much, Venerable. I think that was, shedding light on the innate nature of women and compassion, right? I mean, His Holiness always says that compassion comes so naturally to women, right? So while women are believed to be naturally more compassionate, um, are they also naturally more inclined to some negative emotions or negative feelings like jealousy or envy? So I'd like to ask Patricia for her thoughts on that. And meanwhile, our audience, I just wanted to let you know that you can chime in and put in your questions wherever you are, either on Facebook or on StreamYard, and we would get them across to our panelists. So please do keep sending in your questions. So, Patricia, what do you think? Are women naturally more inclined to some negative emotions as well?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because for me, that's like men are from Mars and women are from Venus, that sort of thing. You know, we say that, you know, what do we associate or identify? Men more with anger, and women more with emotion. Again, I think jealousy and envy is not gender specific. We all feel it, but we feel it differently. Yeah, different things might make a guy jealous than a woman. So the poisons of jealousy and envy, I don't think are inclined. You know, women are more inclined to feel them. Um,
And how do you think we should work with those, those negative emotions?
Mm. Well, I think that that compassion is a wonderful antidote, and now Venerable will tell us in Buddhist terms what, you know, the prescription is. But compassion, for me, compassion is the root of great medicine for anger, for all the poisons. And you know, women are actually, again, hardwired. We produce more oxytocin, you know, because of our biology. You know, we're able to come with this nurturing um, juice that helps us to become more expressive that way. And we have been so culturalized that, just think for a moment, what would it be if men had hundreds of years practicing being the nurturing parent at home? Things would change, wouldn't they? You know, so again, um, the Dalai Lama is a man, well, in a male body. And he is the most compassionate being on the planet. I mean, you just get the goosies when you think about him, right? um, so, yeah, again, I don't think that, you know, that we as women are more inclined to jealousy or envy. I think it's different.
So, Tripti ji, what do you think were some of your challenging negative emotions, right? And or defilements that you thought came in the way of your practice?
Well, there were so many. But the one that I was really working on more than others was anger. So, one of my biggest negative emotions was anger. I remember going to a job interview, and them, they do the standard, what are your strengths, weaknesses, yada yada. And this person who was interviewing me asked me, what is your weakness? And I was like, oh my God, should I do the, you do smarts when you pretend you have a weakness and actually it's a strength, and you train to say that, blah, blah. I didn't. I said anger. And needless to say, I didn't get the job. But it it was something that really was prominent in my life. I knew it was something I had to work on. Um, and the way I used to handle it when I was young was I would refuse to speak. I would want to have time when it was in check, so that what came out of my mouth when I was angry didn't affect other people. But it would take me a certain amount of time to dissolve that anger, within myself. Like, I would shut myself up and say, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to deal with it, I just need to be by myself and go for long walks and talk it through in my head. I think that was myself trying to find an antidote to something that I knew could very negatively impact every single relationship I had, and get in the way of any growth as a human being. And that was the one, Smita, that I worked on the most. And I totally believe I have made progress in it. I'm sure there's more progress to be made, as is with everything, as you get better versions of yourself out. But that was the biggest one.
Thank you so much, Tripti, for being so open about it. I mean, it's not easy to speak about our own, negative negative emotions, and the challenges that we have had on our path. So, thank you so much for sharing that. We have a question from the audience at this point. And I'll send this to Patricia. Is it true that women and men deal with anxiety differently? If so, how does that impact our practice?
Who is that to?
That's to you, Patricia.
Oh, is it true that women and men deal with anxiety differently? Well, women are, up to 3 times more likely than men to develop depressive disorders. Can you imagine? They're stressful, and that's in response to their stressful events. There are actually greater number of severe depression symptoms than men, and women have a greater lifetime prevalence of social specific phobias and anxiety. Once, I teach mindfulness to both men and women, and once they get the information about their default mode and the automatic pilot that we live in, once they truly understand that pain times resistance equals suffering, and they can begin to change their perception. Genla was talking about that earlier. Change their perception about their anxiety, about what's going on. Again, there is no difference. Once they come to understanding that avoidance is actually the enemy, that turning towards the difficulty is the answer, then they have developed skillful means. They can deal with their anxiety better. We're told that we have 125,000 thoughts a day. And one of our problems, and one of the things that develops anxiety, is that we take all of them seriously. I think that humor is developed when we practice mindfulness, and it is that humor that women actually have great strength in, and they have a tender-mindedness that once they understand what's happening to themselves with their anxiety, they begin to trust, because women are more trustful. They have tender-mindedness, and this ability to be deeply compassionate. When they apply that to themselves, great changes happen, in their response to their own anxiety. If that makes sense, yeah. So I hope I've answered your question.
So, Venerable Dasel, do you want to add something to that?
I'd like to kind of dovetail back into the thoughts about envy and jealousy, and as well as what Tripti ji was talking about with anger, and that, and this profound sharing Patricia just gave about the deep awareness and then ability to respond with compassion to one's own experience is that, when we recognize, what did the Buddha talk about, emotions and mind, was that all of these are just fleeting states of experience. They don't have concrete reality somewhere. And so he identified, like a physician would diagnose, well, why do we suffer? And he said, we suffer because there are these kind of three main poisons of ignorance, egoic, selfish desires that lead then to aversion, hatred, that also lead to conceit or pride, that then lead to jealousy, envy. So these kind of five poisons. And then underneath those are a whole range of different kinds of emotional states that come up. But he said, basically, these are not part of anyone's mind stream. And we've all lived beginningless time as female, male, animals, insects, everything. Life is beginningless, endless. We've all been in other lifetimes. I mean, someone asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama once on a psychology panel discussion. He said, oh, yes, I've been a woman many lifetimes. No problem. He's embodying all these qualities that he can cultivate because his mind is beyond these concepts of limitation. Concepts are, in one sense, help us understand and communicate, but concepts by themselves are very constricting. They're very limited. And so, knowing that we can observe what's helpful and what's not, the Buddha said, all right, let's work with at least creating these five concepts of ignorance, selfish attachment, hatred, pride, jealousy, because none of these things, they're all like poisons and they're not part of our mind stream. They're not part of anyone's genderedized mind stream. And they're changeable because they're not part of the mind stream. It means we can get rid of them. That's why we practice. That's why we have the Dharma. And so on one level, we have to kind of transcend and get out of the concepts of genderedized Western psychology, gender role studies, and all this kind of thing. And we have to say, also working with that framework where it's helpful, saying, yes, okay, because this is the way these societies and cultures have been built up. And now we can say the East too, very much more so in some ways in Asia, of the role of the masculine, feminine, the society, family roles. What's the middle way? How do we transform with the Dharma to get all those poisons out of everyone's mind stream? Because they don't help anyone. Ignorance doesn't help anyone. Egoic selfishness doesn't help anyone. Hatred and anger doesn't. We can see it right now with what's going on in the world. Jealousy, pride doesn't help. And, so we can change. And if we change properly, it would help those who are in this kind of female role that's been held traditionally come up more with their own sense of self, their own sense of empowerment, their wisdom and sharing, and their compassion. It would help those in the male roles come more into their tenderness, their expression, their gentleness, their parenting, their softness, and still have their wisdom and their logic and compassion. There's no need to throw things out that work. We can all benefit from everything that's beneficial. This is what the Buddha is trying to say, because your purified mind that's free of those poisons is beginningless and endless. It's omniscient. It's compassionate. It's clear seeing. It's only ever beneficial. It's never in duality. And it's kind, it's wise, and it's clear and light. It's seeing and perceiving the true nature of the reality. So there's no gender concept there. And we all can come into that framework. So we need kind of a both and. We need to be able to look at the relative, see the ultimate, work with what's really beneficial in the relative, but really be aiming towards that ultimate. And that's why, this is good to have these discussions, but then trying to understand, essentially, we want to just get rid of any of the poisonous states of mind that really don't bring joy and happiness, compassion, and equanimity to oneself or to others. So this is why it's so precious to have a Dharma. We don't have to reinvent. His Holiness has also said, if you look at Buddhist psychology that's been developed over 2,600 years, and look at Western psychology, which has only a couple hundred years going for it, it's like going back to kindergarten. So we should also continue to merge, and I call it the rising of the West, the West and the East, and the North and the South. There are many things that can come in, but obviously, to my mind, I'm a Buddhist monastic. I find that the Dharma is the most profound elixir that really looks at things very clearly and not, emotionally to what's beneficial, but getting out of emotionality, getting out of reactivity, which doesn't mean not having emotions at all. And what Tripti shared was, yes, we have to recognize our anger. I'm very happy you were honest. Always be honest, because that's fine. If it was the place for you, they would have said, wonderful, she's being really honest. We want an honest teammate like that on our team. I want you on my team, Tripti, to say, look, my biggest challenge is anger. I mean, we want to deal with people who are honest. It takes courage to be honest. So good on you. And as I said, in my first response, when this tragedy happened, when I was a 21-year-old college student, I was filled with rage. I was a young feminist and really like, this is horrible. And But I recognized after like 9 months of that, I was like, this doesn't feel right. I'm not going to be an angry person for the rest of my life. And my grandmother kind of came in and said, no, you're not. You're here to love. You know who you are. And then years later, 8 years later, and this is to the women's capacity for psychology, for sisterhood, for transformation. My sister would be pregnant and give birth, and we didn't know the date that this tragedy had befallen our grandmother. But my mother, of course, knew because it was her mother. I was living in Berlin at the time, doing a lot of activism and transformative education work. And I got a phone call from my mother saying, I just wanted you to know, the first one to know outside of me, that what has formerly been the most tragic day of my life 8 years ago, today has now transformed into one of the happiest because my first granddaughter's born. This kind of thing no one can orchestrate. This is profound, profound dedication to the power of transformation, of healing, of love, of the power of, my grandmother's intention to help her child. And then my sister having her first child 8 years to that very same day. We have to trust in that goodness of life, darlings. This is what the Buddha is trying to say, is life is amazing and wonderful. And that this transformation comes in ways that we're part of, we can't claim responsibility for, but we're co-creating all the time, this dependent arising. And this, founded in compassion, as Sister Patricia said, that's the ground. But with the wisdom together of the dependent arising, as His Holiness is also showing us how to work with not being angry, not being reactive towards the Chinese. He's always wanting to dialogue with them, always working with them. Now 400 million Chinese following Buddhism, meeting with His Holiness, inspired by it. We have to just keep going based on those things and not the emotional reactivity. So yes, of course, recognize, of course, monastics, we have our work that we're doing. This is the reason I wanted to become a monastic. It's my reminder every day. But when I get dressed in the morning, one of my Western monastic sisters, Ken Modroma, gave me a great little card that has a beautiful little reminder on it that says, putting on my robes, I live a life of freedom to bring joy to the world. And that's the job description. But I told her recently, I said it to everyone, all lay people I was teaching. I said, you can say it when you get up in the morning, putting on my clothes, I live a life of freedom to bring joy to the world. So as an embodied woman now, that you feel very empowered with those wisdom and compassion. This is our time to be bringing the joy to the world. I mean, how much more evidence do we need? We've had COVID. We have war in Europe now after many decades. And who knows what else might be coming. But we have each other, and we know that the strength of each other, that's where we join in and we become much more powerful.
Thank you so much for that, Venerable. I really like the fact that we are so open. We can so openly speak about some of our drawbacks or some of the areas that we need to work, and that often leads me to all the conversations I hear around us. That uh, and I've heard that comment, called out to me several times. Buddha, you're so aware of yourself or your feelings or your emotions at all times, right? Is it natural for women to be more self-aware? And what are your thoughts on that, Patricia? Are women more self-aware?
Patricia, that one's to you. Did you get that one was coming
Oh,
over to you?
sorry, I'm having difficulty with my phone here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if you believe the studies, only slightly. Now, what do we think about that, girls? Only slightly.
I
So
mean,
what is
what
yeah.
I want to share right away is a little story that comes from the Buddha background. There was a king and a queen, and they were both very devout disciples back in ancient India to Buddha. They were alive during Buddha's time. And the king loved his queen. And he said, "My darling, out of everything in this world, what do you cherish the most?" And she thought about it for a little while. And she said, "Well, my own life, I think, is what I cherish most." And he was a little shocked, like he was waiting for the big lead up. "Oh, you, my darling, you're my gorgeous king." And he said, And she said, "Well, what about you?" He said, "Well, yeah, I guess myself too." And then they both were like, "Is this right? Let's go and see the Buddha and ask him what's going on for us." So the sutra tells a story. They went to see the Buddha and they said, what the conversation arose, and this is how we answered. And the Buddha thought about it and he said, "Yes, it's absolutely right. To each one is one's own life most cherished." That's just honesty. So Patricia, I agree. Those studies are probably right that each one is most aware equally to what brings us happiness, that we do. I mean, that is how we're wired, is to take care of like what we've been given. As I mentioned, even a mosquito will preserve its own life. It doesn't sit there and let you swat it. Life by its own nature wants to take care. And so I don't think there's a big gender bias around, wanting to have that happiness. I mean, sometimes, yes, His Holiness has said women are more naturally compassionate, more naturally generous. Like in his culture, in the Tibetan culture, in the Ladakhi Himalayan cultures, when mothers know they have a precious pregnancy, they know, oh, this one's going to the monastery. This is a precious rebirth, a tulku, someone who's lived before, who's only here to carry on the Dharma. I don't know many other cultures on this planet that gladly mothers would say, yes, when you're very young, you're going to be going there to study, and that they know, that they won't have that kind of same special mother-child relationship with them. That's incredibly giving, incredibly profound. But it's her own knowing that through her wisdom and compassion, this is what she wants to do. So that there's that kind of an awareness, but there could be the awareness, also from the child picking that mother. So there's so much more we don't know. But what we do know is the Buddha said, yes, to each of us is our own life most cherished. And that we should know that then all others are the same that way. That's why His Holiness will say, everyone's the same, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. Those kind of generalized truisms we can say are universal, transcendent of the
So
gender.
I come to Tripti with that question. Do you believe that women are more perceptive or intuitive? And, you know, has that played a role in your Vipassana practice itself?
Well, I think women are more aware of being aware. I think that's what it is. I don't think women are more aware than men. I think probably they could both be. It's just that I genuinely believe that women are more time poor in the multitude of roles that they play in everyday lives, and that they find little pockets of time to internalize things, um, it- because they need to find that me time somewhere, right? And when they do that, there is an awareness of how they're feeling, being in touch with themselves, and so on. It's a huge gift we have. I think it's a huge gift and a huge strength. I have two children, a boy and a girl, and I see the difference in them. Completely same upbringing, same household, uh, you know, same parents throughout, and uh, I feel that my son went through more outward looking, and my daughter went, had pockets of, and maybe it's the physicality of what we go through as women, maybe the fact that we have that period and we're acknowledging pain and thinking about how that's making us feel. I think it's huge. Poor boys don't ever have that feeling of having to stand still and deal with something on a regular basis. And then even to know it's coming, being aware of, oh, the pain is coming and I will go through it, and being one with it. Similarly, we talked about being a mother, but I'm not even talking about having a precious birth, just having a birth. It's going to be bloody painful, and yet you are one with it and you acknowledge it. And men, poor things, don't have to go through that. They are at the other end of the tunnel, and of course they feel the wonder of creating something wonderful and gorgeous, which is what human life is all about. But they don't have to go through that whole experience of saying, I am going to embrace this. It's going to be terrible, but that something wonderful is waiting. And I feel like as women, our dharma journey starts the day we start getting our period, because there is pain and you're going to acknowledge it, you're going to embrace it and go through it, and you'll be fine. So I think we're incredibly more blessed than men, and having been given this birth, of who we came into life with. That's my interpretation of it anyway.
Thank you so much. That is so, so well put. And true that, like the way you called out the difference between your son and a daughter, you know, looking more within. I think women tend to look within, introspect more. So, Venerable, you had any thoughts on that? Do women introspect more?
Well, I love everything Tripti ji just shared, because I think even having menstruation, you can become aware much more profoundly of cycles and change, so that second noble truth of impermanence. It's the body's changing every month, the moods are changing, so maybe there is that earlier sense of like, okay, this is what's going on here, and you're tuning in because it's your body going through it and your emotions going through it. And as Tripti really has that beautiful, I think when you were young, a very profound, wise practice to stay silent. I think that was quite amazing, to just digest and not react, but be able to respond after silence, of dissolving that poison emotion so that you're not sharing it and spreading it. Fantastic. Yes, I think intuitively the studies that I would fall back on, not just for human beings now, is as biological creatures. In my undergraduate, I studied in the Galapagos because I was really interested in Darwin's, insights to this idea of survival of the fittest and evolutionary biology, which is females of almost all creatures. There are some that co-parent, like starfish and things like, I mean, not starfish, seahorses, but mostly it's the females in all species that are the mothers. And what this biology studies have shown are the females tend to have much stronger perceptions. So whether it's sight, hearing, sense of smell, taste, touch, and also intuitive, maybe, so that seems to be the case, to be a function of biology, of how we've evolved to be the caretakers. Because as Triptila said, I mean, you're giving birth, you're not only going to go through the pain and the wonder of the childbirth, you're also accepting then, for human beings especially, without the nurturing of someone feeding us for those first years, really, for a human child up to the first decade at least, could never survive without the care of its own mother or someone acting in that role. And so definitely the way the human mothers honed in to her needs of her babies, and responsively, selflessly, always being high guarded, intuitively in tuned, aware. I'm not a physical, biological mother in this lifetime, but even for my role in what I'm doing on the planet, I feel like I think sometimes, like, people always ask me, oh, you don't have children, who will take care of you when you get old? I said, well, I feel like a great mother. I'll have many heart children around the world. I'm not worried about that. I said, you have 2 children, but are you sure that their own lives won't take more importance, that they'll still really be there for you? And it was with a Ladakhi Dharma sister friend. She said, oh, Venerable, when you say that, it's true. I don't really know what they're going to do. And I said, but don't worry about that. Just trust, that you'll always be taken care of, and that you have motherly capacities, and that those mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, brothers, that mother love will come back to you. And mother love doesn't have to be gendered. That's not what it's. So we have to use our own knowing that is intuitively. We say Mother Earth, we say this deep interconnection. We are held with that, and going through those challenges of pain that become less daunting because of the courage of willingly saying, yes, I'm going to take this role on, because what more important role is there than having a precious mother? Everyone here that's part of this life has a precious mother. Even His Holiness the Dalai Lama said his most profound teacher of compassion was his own mother. And he's acknowledged his own belief is women are definitely much more wired for compassion. Intuitively, biologically, studies have been shown where they had a big group of men and women, not necessarily Buddhists at all, but in a big theater, being shown images very quickly of very different kinds of engagement of animals, of human emotion, of wars, of peace. And they registered the women's reactions seconds before a disturbing image would come up on the screen. The women were already registering some kind of a compassionate response. They were registering now using the biology and the physiology of the body. But that's the only way we can register mind and emotion, because those are non-physical things. But this is what's so thrilling to be alive in the 21st century, is we've got so much to learn and so much to share that can really bring, I say, the evolution of love forward for the happiness of the whole planet. So I think, yes, let's use that as our secret powers, that we can provide, and we can really not judge our brothers, not say we're better, not say we're here to take over, but bring balance, invite them to also, they are the beneficiaries of that, but trust ourselves more to be co-creators, co-designers of a more happy and peaceful world, definitely. And that has nothing to do with a Buddhist, but just healthy psychology of how we all want to be living together.
Yep. Time for us to get a male panelist on this series.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, Venerable, we have an audience question that I would send your way. Are our psychology, our behaviors, and feelings completely attributed to our karma?
Oh, well, they're very karmically based for sure. I mean, so is our gender. The Buddha really looked at this. I'm not a Buddha. I'm not an omniscience in my practice, but from my studies in our sacred texts, the Buddha really looked at all these things. And I've had many conversations with my root lama, with Kensor Rinpoche, Lobsang Setan, who finished his geisha degree here in the U.S. in the 80s, and who has been a teacher here. And he's seen all around the world different ways of things arising, but from the grounding from within the text, from an academic background, the Buddha said, yes, karma just means actions. What are we doing with our body, speech, and mind? That really does, on many, many profound levels, from our emotional, mental capacities to our own physical conditions that we're part of, our own physical form that we're appearing in, really does have to go back to our karma, which of course is what we're really developing through our mind. How are we seeing the world is then determining how are we being in the world, because that's how we're seeing it and thinking about it develops our concept of our reality. And those concepts that we hold really fast and true then develop how we interact and respond. Those are all karmas, all actions. So first it starts with the mind. I mean, the Buddha's whole program is a psychology and a study of mind. That's the whole thing. And what we work with in the perception of our mind, the closer it is to the reality of how things exist, or the further away, then determines the karma, the body, speech, and mind activities that will follow. So someone, for example, who has no idea of mind or concern around healthy emotional mental states and how to deal would be really suffering under ignorance and fearful and aggressive and angry and selfish. And that would lead to a very strong material sense of reality. And they would be much more concerned about making weapons and aggressions and, you know, how are humanly made things like history books going to remember, and da, 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 da. It will be a very temporal, earthly based kind of concern of karma. And someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's the 14th Dalai Lama, who says, yes, of course, you know, beginningless, endless lifetimes, and 14th lifetime, leaving the 13th, who has a much clearer understanding of mind, will have a whole different kind of mind stream through his speech, through his activities, will have a whole entirely different kind of reality. You know, so karma is definitely dependent upon those mental and factors, which then develop the emotional and physical. Yeah. This is what the Buddha is saying, not what I'm saying, not what Venerable Dasel is saying. This is, you know, from the Buddha's deep, many, many lifetimes the Buddha took before 2,600 years ago, finally attaining enlightenment. He really worked hard at that great breakthrough. So he was looking at all these things very deeply, trying to come to a real freedom from what doesn't work into what does.
Thank you so much, Venerable. We had another question from Angela, slightly a different topic here, but nevertheless lends itself well to this conversation. Looking at the global geopolitical situation now, do you think we need more female political leaders now more than ever? If so, how can we encourage more females to actively engage in politics?
Maybe
I'll
I
open it
can.
up.
Yeah, Smita, I would love to just
Yeah.
chime into that.
Thank you.
I think just looking at the geopolitical situation right now, everywhere in the world, I think the issue is not just women. I think it's about diversity. We know that decision making is so much more richer, more profound, better when there's more diversity in the room. Any kind of decision making, and we find that in the corporate world more than ever, right? um, that's why we have all these diversity programs, and that's not only about men and women. It's about regional location you're coming from, but your sexual orientation. It's about representation, and what we are looking for is representation of different points of view. That the very, very beginning of that, the baseline is men women divide, because without that there is zero diversity. Just any kind of decisions, but especially I think the one that was being referenced here is around the war in Europe. And I think the question that begs to be asked is, would there be a war if Putin was a woman? And I have asked myself that question the last few weeks, a lot. And I truly believe, and again, it's not the view of this forum, but my own personal view. So I want to make sure that the forum and I dissociate in that respect, is that there would not be a war if Putin was a woman, because we are natural creators and we hate destruction, of any kind. And it's senseless in its form, it's senseless in who it's impacting. Of the millions of refugees and our offices in Ukraine, the women have left their men in the country and migrated to Poland and everywhere else that they have found. And we just had a town hall yesterday, a global town hall, where these women and men who represent our company were talking about how their lives are impacted, their families that they've lost. And I really think that if the basic diversity of decision making was in the room, where more sensible decisions that come from different points of view would be in the room, we wouldn't have the situation we have. And I think it's about diversity. And I think the male-female divide is the first basic diversity quotient that needs to be addressed everywhere.
And just to jump in, I agree with everything Tripti said. Absolutely, Tripti ji. that diversity, and as well as prior to the war, I mean, even through COVID, the studies were that the countries headed up by female politicians responded much more effectively to the epidemic. Okay, so and His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said this 21st century has to be the century of female leadership on every level, from politics to within the society to spiritual leadership. You know, that we really need first to hear the female lens and voice that Tripti is talking about, like this kind of deeper, more interconnected, intuitive, cooperative sense, and then this deeper, richer diversity on many other levels. But because the women's first intuitive response, as you said beautifully, Tripti, women are creators, you know, and they're cooperative. They're looking for the dialogue to resolve. They don't, we really, just even physically, we respond so viscerally to destruction and to some harm, you know, to feeling that anything's going to be wounded or hurt. It's not every single woman. Of course, there are more these days also women taking up guns and doing these things. And someone sent me an image of, you know, this is what the new woman power looks like. And it was a woman holding her child and the Ukraine holding the hand, and she had the semi-automatic gun on her back. So that's also not, you know, I think we have to really look at nonviolent, peaceful dialogue, inclusive, that's willing to compromise and cooperate, win-win, not my way or the highway. That has to get completely beyond violence, completely out of these poisons of duality, my side, your side. Yes, social democracy. Yes, respect, international cooperation, deep listening. I think women are much better at the deep listening, as you mentioned, first to yourself and then bringing it in. But I think we really need much more first participation from that capacity to lead with that intuitive, cooperative, compromising kind of approach that maybe really first comes from a diversity of the women who are keeping the greater good in mind and able to bring their talents, and then inviting that diversity to the table, because women naturally, I mean, look, we're quite diverse just on this little panel. You know, it just happens. It happens quite organically in my experience that there's an openness now, even in the younger generation, to from the monks to let the nuns really have a platform to sit next to them. Like a lot, these are major transformations, even within the Sangha. You know, the Geshe-mas are now getting, the Tibetans in the Gelugpa tradition are getting a degree that up until just a few years ago was denied to them, you know, historically. Thousands of years. So this is a time to start to recognize, hey, we're all stronger together. We have to see which concepts, as Patricia mentioned, you know, we have lots and lots of thoughts, but we don't have to believe everything we think. You know, we can keep space for the new to come in. And we can also look studying wise, like they did with COVID. Oh, these countries happen to be all led by women, and they did a much better way of responding for their whole country's benefit, which then of course benefits the whole world, because they were more effective in responding to the COVID. And yes, if there were more women closer at the big table, you know, sitting together at the big table, dialoguing with each other, recognizing that the men there too had profound contribution, well, you know, maybe we're coming up with some much better, both small solutions that then transform into the collective solution. Because if it's good on the individual kind of micro level, it's automatically helping the macro, because that's the way things exist.
Thank you so much for your insights, Tripti ji and Venerable. We have one last question from the audience before we wrap up for the day. How does biology of the brain impact our behaviors and feelings? And I think to add on to that, does the biology even differ in men and women? Right, Patricia, if you could take that.
Well, you know, I was just going to talk about some of the talents and some of the strengths that we have as women in our earth suits, and I think that might answer the question. We are slightly more aware, and it's another reason why we're up for the job of leadership. We have higher emotional competency. We're higher in acting with resiliency. We rate higher, believe it or not, in integrity and honesty. We have stronger interpersonal skills. And we actually mature younger. We have stronger connectivity in our brain parts earlier than men do. And as said earlier, we're wired to feel pain, so to recognize what it is for all people and the importance of compassion and connectivity. We're hormonally, we hormonally have this system that causes stress and affects the way we respond to stress. So it's a deep, we're actually geared for deep listening. And when we hear ourselves, imagine if women, now they say more women are going to university than men today. So now imagine if we could change that males have more assertive and assertion and higher self-esteem. Imagine if we could change that. What would happen if we all came to the table to change that? So I think that women are biologically wired for leadership.
So that was a good way to end today's conversation. I'm sure there are a lot more questions, and there are a lot more questions on my mind and our audiences as well. But we will hold those for the next session, and we'll continue the conversations on women's psychology and Buddhism in the months to come, and expand it beyond just looking at women, but maybe bring in a male panelist and look at men's psychology as well. So, with that said, thank you so much, Patricia, Tripti ji, and Venerable. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I've been seeing the audience comments that they really enjoyed the conversation. And we look forward to having you again on this panel in the following month. Thank you so much. Hope you all had a good time too.
Thank
Thank you
you.
once
Thank you,
again.
Smita. Wonderful moderation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brother Sarab and Brother Chong behind the scenes who are making Sattva possible. Thank you also as well for providing this platform for such rich and meaningful discussion.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone for sharing your time. Thanks to our moderator Smita for such a very beautiful moderation, as well as thanks to all our contributor. It was very enriching, and I hope we have inspired all the women throughout. Okay, so before we wind up our session, I think we have some upcoming events to announce.
Okay, so we have next event on 17th April, which is Ordinary Mind is the Way. It's a Zen meditation guided by Myongan Sunim. And again we are going to have a part 2 of this Noble Tara series, Women, Buddhism and Psychology, on 24th April, Sunday. And same, it will be moderated by Sister Smita Lahiri, and our contributors will be the same, adding Sister Andrea. So now we will wind up this discussion by 4 great vows. So am I going to say something?
I think we are going to invite Venerable Tenzin Dasel for a short prayer, short dedication prayer in Tibetan, and then Sister Smita and everyone, I guess.
Okay.
So I would like to
Venerable
invite.
Tenzin Dasel.
Angriwa we corporation come dear pendang dewa malu chungwene chenrezi one tenzin getsoi shapezi te bardutin gyorchi Jangchup sem chokrin poche makai panam ke gyorchi ke parnim parme paryang gone gondu pelwar show. And in English that sounds like in that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezi remain in life till samsara's end. Bodhi mind, precious and sublime, may it arise where it has not arisen, and where it has arisen, may it flourish and grow forevermore.
Thanks a lot. Sister Pratisha, do you have any short dedication prayer? Uh,
Sis,
okay, maybe she cannot hear us or there is some problem. Sister Smita?
From my two collections, vastest space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds, wisdom eyes, blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving kindness for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of the complete created paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from my minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever directions the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aim. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. By even this great path to enlightenment traversed completely due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their children. May all humans and non human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be separated in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may they always be assisted by the mighty ones and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.
Thank you, that was beautiful. Sister Tripti?
We've had a wonderful discussion for the last hour and a half, and may the imprints of these discussions enter all our minds and be there in the background to flourish at some point. And may the dedication of this time that all of us have spent be towards the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and all our wonderful, wonderful teachers who are showing us every step of the path in such an generous and wholehearted way. Thank you.
Sister Pratisha, can you hear us? Okay. Uh,
Yeah, I would just add, may all beings be at ease and free of suffering.
Thank you. So, Samiksha, please.
the four great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. The illusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May all beings be well, happy, and safe. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your precious time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See you next time.
Take
Yeah,
See you
care.
next.
thank you.
Thank you.